Welcome to the Group Answers podcast. I'm your host, Brian Daniel. This is the weekly show designed specifically for pastors, disciple makers, group pastors, and small group leaders. Truly, we are created to help anyone with bottom line responsibilities for discipleship. Our goal is simple: to resource, train, and encourage you in the vital work of discipleship. This is the Group Answers podcast. Let's do it. So Jen Oshman, welcome to the Group Answers show. It is nice to finally meet you.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is great.
So I've come all the way to Nashville to record here in the studio, but you are a Coloradan, and I think if I'm remembering the bio right, you can't say lifelong, but native Coloradan, correct?
That's right. Born and raised in Denver, Colorado.
And you and Mark and the family have retraced your steps through, we'll get to it later, but through really, I guess, all over the world in some respects.
That's right. We came back 10 years ago, but we had a 15-year gap in there in the middle of missions overseas.
So, Jen, to start, I've got to ask about this collision that I found on your website between theology and anthropology that you like to introduce. So, what is the origin of this interest? And tell us, why is it important to use as a disciple maker and the practice of discipleship?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure your listeners will understand why I love theology, of course. I love just getting to know who God is through his word.
That's the easy one.
That's the easy one. That's right. But anthropology is the study of humans, the study of specifically cultural anthropology. So I love God and I love us. I love people. And I want to understand, how do we apply God's word and his vision to different cultures? I've lived in several different cultures, and I'm just fascinated even by my own culture. So I want to look at the Bible and say, okay, how do I apply this to life here and now?
So how long is this interest? As you said, 10 years in Colorado and then 15 years before that. If we're talking about your time in Japan and the Czech Republic, then we're talking about a couple of decades that this has been percolating. Is my math good there?
It absolutely is. In fact, my undergrad degree is cultural anthropology. So I even studied it before I ever got to the mission field.
So I was reading, this is going to sound crazy, I think the book was called Tally-Ho and the Fox, which is a crazy title for a discipleship book. And one of the things I remember the author saying in that book was something along the lines is, best I can tell, God is in the people business. So it seems like this mashup is consistent with that kind of sentiment. And I assume that kind of ideological practice or conceptual thinking has really contributed to you and Mark in church planning, I would think, right?
Absolutely.
All right. So I've got a few questions here associated with that. So first, I really like to talk about ministry context. We've lived in New Mexico, we have lived in the South in a couple of places, and now we currently live out there not far from you guys in Colorado. And I love this idea of disciple making, where ministry context and disciple making overlap in some kind of Venn diagram. Mm-hmm. So, Jen, in your opinion, what are the distinctives of discipleship as you have come to know them west of the Mississippi in the American West?
I think this is a really good question, because as you have experience now living in Colorado, life is different here in the West. I travel almost every weekend speaking at different churches around the country. So I get a glimpse of what church life is like and what life is like for those disciples in different parts of the country. And I can say that it is unique here. I think what especially marks ministry in Colorado is our fierce devotion to rugged individualism. Colorado is a big destination state. There are very few natives here, but people move here for a specific kind of lifestyle, typically. It's very common for people to come here to sort of look for themselves, to search for meaning, and they feel like they find it in the great outdoors. And so people will commit their summers to hiking, their winters to skiing, and they feel this sense of awe and worship and purpose in Colorado because of the grandeur that we live in. But also, Denver is routinely ranked in, amongst the top 5 loneliest cities in the country. And most of the lonely cities are Seattle, Las Vegas, they're San Francisco. They are the cities that are out west. And so this commitment to, independence and individualism comes to an end or sort of becomes like counterfeit or costly when it ends in this isolation and loneliness. So the worldview here in Colorado only goes so far.
So how do you use that information? First off, I would absolutely affirm that. And there's also, tell me if you agree or not, there's this, I would call it an element of karma that
Absolutely.
you put into some universal system and it spits out something because of what you put in.
Yep.
And I would not call it justice. I would call it trade. There's like an equity thing there. And we had been there, Jen, in that area maybe 6 weeks or so, and Karen and I were driving to church and we were talking. I said, I can't put my finger on what the difference is, but I feel it. But how do those conclusions, how have they informed you and Mark as you have planted Parker Redemption?
Yeah, you are absolutely right. People in Colorado trend toward being spiritual, but I agree that it's transactional. If you can move to Colorado and the cost of living here is very high, so much of our population is fairly wealthy, or at least, quote unquote, self-sufficient. They see themselves as self-sufficient. So even Parker, the town that I live in now, we have this statue on Main Street in the middle of our town square that is entitled The Self-Made Man. And it's a bronze statue, and this man is literally chipping himself out of a big boulder. And we love to look at that statue because it feels like it's such an emblem of our community. People believe that they are self-made. So there is some spirituality in it, but don't let it be exclusive in any way, right? It is more of a karma, just like you said. I totally agree with that. So with that in mind, in ministry here in Colorado, you can't come into church planting or into any conversation or discipleship relationship assuming that the other person even believes in God or even has any, kind of a Christian worldview. So you might even have to back up from that. And I would say one of the primary practical things that we have had to focus on over the last 10 years is the long view of relationships, to make ourselves present and available to investing in community, in our neighbors, getting to know people, but knowing that it's not going to be like, oh, great, I took the neighbor's cookies because they just moved in. I'm going to share the gospel with them and they're going to come to church. There has to be a long view in mind where we really take the time to cultivate that relationship and then be ready when the Lord allows us to impact their life in that way and share the love of Christ with them.
All right, so we've already referenced the fact that you've lived in Colorado, Czech Republic, and Japan. But when we're talking about other places, let's say in the lower 48, and just what you know about those areas, and, out of that knowledge, what you believe to be true, compare those two things. Like, how do they measure? Here's the real question. What is it about what you and Mark really is, mostly lifelong Coloradans? There was a missionary experience there, but that's been your context for a great number of years. So taking that into account, what do you think churches in other contexts could learn from that? Like you talked about the long view. It seems to me places like Colorado and maybe the more difficult ministry context, to some extent, I can't help but think that that's where everybody's going.
Yeah.
And Hendersonville, USA, for instance, small town USA, is going to be there in that same paradigm at some point, maybe not too distant future, maybe on down the road. But what would you say to those contexts about what you've learned in Colorado that may be helpful in the way that you minister and the way that you have established a discipleship there at Parker Redemption?
Yeah. Well, the reality is that self-sufficiency does run out because we are not God. And so every human is confronted with this at some point. Either we realize, boy, I actually can't be anything I want to be. I don't have the skills and abilities to do that or the resources. I hit a limitation. Or sin enters, or sickness enters, their marriage falls apart, their kids, something goes tragically wrong with a child, or maybe they do achieve. They achieve so much. They achieve all their dreams, and then they realize this is actually much more hollow than I thought it would be. It's not living up to the expectation. And so we have really done our best to be there in people's lives. No matter how their response is, I think you can't be too blown about by the response that you receive because it's usually pretty cold. but to keep going toward those who are cold and just saying, hey, we're just here. Like, you want to come for dinner? Tell me about your life. Tell me about your job. How's your kid doing? And then they know that you're somebody who cares about them when things go wrong, when the divorce happens, when the kid is sick, when the tragedy strikes. They know, okay, these people actually care about me because they've been investing in me, even though I've been kind of blowing them off. And it's been a privilege and an honor to be someone standing there when those things happen in the lives of those around us, because they do think they're self-sufficient, but they come to find out they are not.
Yeah, it's a strange tension. There's the frontier. I've used that same term, frontier spirit and self-sufficiency, but there's also a fairly strong thread of communal element. And those two things exist side by side that would seem not to be first cousins, let's say. And that's something that's been a little bit of a challenge to navigate, because it's a both and with things that don't really work that well together. So let me ask you about that idea of presence that you kind of articulated. You talked to some of the ways that you guys do that. Have you found like any one thing to be more effective than others in terms of just making yourself available and being present in people's lives without being, for lack of a better way of putting it, overbearing? Like, what's the art of being present?
Yeah. Oh, I love that question. And I don't know that I think we get it wrong often, but what I will say is this: when we moved back from living overseas, you can imagine after 15 years being gone, we were very disoriented. Even though we grew up here, that's a long gap, and, we raised our family overseas. So by the time we got back, we really just felt like, gosh, who am I as a Coloradan? I only know myself as an overseas worker, but here I am back in my home context, and I just don't really know what to do. Our missions pastor, who mentored us and married us and sent us out to the mission field, his advice to us was this. He said, don't get busy. Don't join the rat race. Don't put your kids in everything. Don't join every club. See what God might do if you stay home, sit on your front porch, open your front door, get to know the people around you and invite them in, and see what God does with that. And when I tell you the shock of my life, here's what happened. This is the crazy thing that happened, and I can only say it's a work of God. We started doing what we did overseas, and that was every Friday night, we invited people into our home for a meal. But we also said, we love to read the Bible with our friends. So we're going to eat. We're going to read the Bible. We want to pray for you. This is the tradition of our family. Would you like to come? And here in Colorado, kind of had to quickly follow up with I promise we're not a cult. We're just people who love Jesus. And this is what we like to do. Would you come? And the shock of our lives was that people came. And I think it was maybe some loneliness, maybe just like, oh, that's interesting. These people are strange. We'll come in and have a meal. Whatever the reason, the Lord prompted the people to receive our invitation. And that was 10 years ago, pre-COVID. I don't know that, what it would be like if we did it today. Regardless, the Lord himself did it. But that is how our church was born. We did not set out to plant a church. We set out to be present and to be just available to the community that God gave us. And he grew a church out of it.
In some sense, it seems like you play if you could just make it as simple as you play the hand that's dealt you, then the curiosity of those around you can be evangelized, I guess is the way that I would put that.
Sure.
And you just open it up for the curiosity to take hold and just throw it out there. But let me ask you, just picking up on that missionary experience, Jen. So let's talk about what you picked up from that experience that you and Mark have applied to ministry there in Redemption Parker in Colorado. So you've talked about it a little bit, but when we moved from the South to New Mexico the first time, there was a culture shock. But the greater culture shock was when we moved back to Tennessee from New Mexico. And that, I'm just wondering if that was a similar experience, because you get the benefit of seeing, let's call it home, for the first time, and feeling it's all the things that is the water you grew up in, that you're experiencing it for the first time again. And there is insight that is engendered in that. And so you guys, two continents, I dare say you don't get a whole lot more different than Colorado, Japan, and Czech. But when you came back to Colorado, what did you learn from those experiences that was applied effectively to ministry in the Colorado context? That's a really long question. I apologize for that, but I think you understand where I'm going.
Yeah. Well, one thing, so both Japan and the Czech Republic have a less than 0.5% Christian population. So out of 200 people, maybe one is a believer. So I will say, even coming back to very secular Colorado, and Colorado is far more secular than most of the nation, you still saw actually people reading their Bibles in Starbucks, or, people talking about the things of God out in public. And so, having come straight from the Czech Republic, which is former communist, very atheist, very spiritually dark, we were kind of overjoyed. Like, okay, there is some capital here, in terms of Christianity. Like, some people are talking about it. And that sort of gave us wind in our sails. Like, oh, maybe this feels maybe more doable than church planting in the Czech Republic. So that was sweet to see. It was interesting too, though. We came back right at the beginning of 2016, and it felt like America was really, really polarized and becoming increasingly polarized, far more polarized than we remembered it 15 years prior. And so I think there was a culture shock there of just, the tension and the corners that people found themselves on. And so navigating that in our community was difficult as well. The culture shock is real. Reverse culture shock is real. Coming back home to your own culture can also be shocking in some ways. But I think, like you said, what can you work with? Do what you can with what you have right where you are. What are the things the Lord is offering you that you can use to love Him and love others?
It sounds like some of it was just confidence, knowing that if you can go to a place like the Czech Republic, or a place like Japan, and have an effective ministry, well, surely in Colorado you can do that too. And just getting outside of the proverbial bubble has its upside.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, at that point, we had a long track record of the Lord providing, raising funds for us to be missionaries, helping our children who we had to raise overseas. We had done an international adoption. We had moved from Asia to Europe to the U.S. Like, the Lord had really taken care of our family through some, really difficult things in our past. And so we knew He is trustworthy. He held us through those storms. He's going to hold us in this one as well. And I'm so thankful that we had that to draw on. It was confidence in the Lord for sure.
All right. I want to ask you about Redemption Parker.
Okay.
We've talked about the church planning. So I'm interested to know the process for establishing a discipleship path as you planted Redemption Parker. You've given us a little bit of the origin story there. But I'd like to know, in the early days, what kind of process was it to pull together? Was it more something that just evolved and you guided, or was it something that you and Mark sat down and said, all right, this is it? Or did you sit down with a team of people and say, this is how we're going to do this? Were there some wadded up pieces of paper around the garbage can? Just talk to us about the process for the discipleship path there at the church.
Yes, absolutely. So, like I said, we did not endeavor to plant a church. When our Friday nights became full in our home, that was very surprising to us. Now, some old friends that we had known decades before, they were part of that. And then also some brand new friends who we had literally just met, for example, at the library, they were coming to, and neighbors that we had just met. So it was a motley crew of people, just from all different places and even backgrounds. But what came from that was a core team that the Lord gave us, those who were mature believers who said, I see God moving here. I want to be a part of that. And maybe they were still going to their Sunday morning church, but they're like, but we're going to go on Friday night and see what's happening over here. As that team started to more solidify and people said, you know what, I think the Lord is planting a church. We want to be all in here. Then we did have a handful of families that were mature believers who wanted to see the Lord move in our community. There are very few churches in our community. So it was not hard to convince Christians in Parker that we need more churches in Parker. And so they became all in. But I will say that initially in those early years, it was more of like a responding or reacting to this growing community. Like, okay, these people are here, they need to meet Jesus and then they need to grow in the Lord. How are we going to make that happen? But the fact that we started in our living room over a meal, time in the Word, and time praying for each other, that has still deeply shaped our church. And we now call those groups gospel communities. There are small groups, but it really is the DNA of our church. We have 85% of our attendees are in a gospel community. We just really promote that and say, here's how you keep a growing church small. Here's how you stay known in a room that's, now has hundreds of people in it, but here's how you stay known. Here's how your needs are met. Here's how, the Lord can take care of you through his family in these gospel communities. And they're all the same. Everybody goes to a house, they have a meal, they're in the word, and they pray for each other. This is kind of like sort of the front lines of the shepherding that takes place in our church. Now, I will add this. As we continue to grow, we became convinced of the need of not just gospel communities, but also some, very organized learning spaces within our church. And so we do have now, an institute, and we do have other things like a theology on the ground, and we've got women's Bible studies and men's Bible studies, and we've added programs so that we could offer more options for our community to opt into discipleship. But that core DNA of being in each other's homes and serving one another well is a hallmark of our church that I don't think will ever go away. And I'm really grateful for it.
Yeah, the word that comes to mind when I hear you say that is intimacy, a gospel
Yes.
intimacy, if you will.
Yeah.
And so what were some of those other contexts? I wrote down institute and...
Yes, we have an institute. So, we have a pastor who's over all of that content that is rolling out throughout the year. We do something called theology on the ground, which is on Sunday nights, where we apply theology to anthropology. I didn't come up with it, and one of the pastors did, but it's basically where we apply the Bible to culture. And we've got women's studies and men's studies, other groups, book clubs. I mean, we see the value of, leaders being able to use the gifts and the passions that God has given them to serve their community, to do the ministry in our community. And so there are a handful of ways we do that now.
Is the expectation that I would be in multiple settings, or is there a funnel effect that's broader to more narrow, or am I in a gospel group and then everything else is elective opt-in? What's the lay of the land in that respect?
Yeah, that is such a good question. There is not an expectation. I think we would prioritize our gospel communities just because we see how effective those are. Truly remarkable moves of God in healing marriages and caring for people as they're dying or birthing children. I mean, these gospel communities, they feel like the early church. And so we just constantly promote them and tell their story so that people are drawn to them. But there's no pressure, especially here in Colorado. And I think this is true about the whole country. I'm sure it is. People are overscheduled, overburdened. They are exhausted. They would do well to take our missions pastor's advice of stay home. Don't join the rat race. And so we're not wanting to put anybody in any kind of rat race. However, we see that, for example, the woman with an unbelieving husband is going to be drawn to women's Bible study more than to a gospel community, or the man with an unbelieving wife, or, there's just different personalities, different life stages, different passions within the church. And so, we don't want to run ourselves ragged responding to everything, but we do want to acknowledge who are the leaders God has given us. What can we do with that so that we can meet more needs in the community?
Do you have a men's discipleship path?
Yes. Oh boy. I wish our executive pastor could be on this call to tell you about it, because, they call it Life Together, and it happens on Sunday nights. And I will tell you that it has been remarkable. The group is, it's fairly, the word organic is so overused, but it's just a natural group. All men are invited. They meet. We don't have our own building yet. Lord willing, we will have our own building soon, but there's a guy at the church who has a large basement. And so dozens of men can go down there and hang out. But so one of our pastors leads them through a brief discussion, usually related to the sermon or something going on in the life of the church, and then just opens the floor for men to share how that particular issue or passage is impacting them, for them to publicly confess sin, for them to corporately ask other brothers to hold them accountable, to come alongside them in what they're facing. And it has been really, really remarkable how, especially after the group existed for maybe a couple years, over the last couple years, seeing intimacy and how the men have just gotten really vulnerable and authentic with one another, and how that has reverberated throughout the church as the men have gotten real before each other and before the Lord. And that's really trickled down into the health of our church. And we're so incredibly grateful to the Lord for the way he's moving in that men's group.
Yeah, thanks for sharing all that. So you've got the gospel community groups, the Institute, Theology on the Ground, the women's Bible study, and the men's Bible study. And it sounds like it is, you make it really clear what the hierarchy is, that we really need you, and this foundational element, which is the gospel community groups. And you've got these more peripheral ministries that are, well, except for men, it sounds like, and maybe women too, that would be maybe secondary. You want everyone in the gospel group, the gospel community groups. I really like that a lot. That's thanks for walking us through that.
You're so welcome.
Jen, or maybe we didn't say it, but was implied, Jen Oshman, the author. So I want to talk about a couple of projects here. Very Good, at the time of this recording, has not been released, but at the time you're listening to it, it probably is, and is scheduled to release April 1st of this year, 2026. And there is a student adaptation of this, and that title is Created on Purpose, and that's later this fall, August 1, of course, again, 2026. To what extent did this concept and this work emerge from the Parker Redemption environment and process?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I am the mom of 4 daughters who we raised all over the world. And my husband and I are both first-gen Christians.
And they're 18, tell us again.
Yep. 18 to 28, 18, 20, 22, and 28. So we just received an empty nest this past fall. We've been driven by the question of, what does it mean to be a Christian? What does it mean to be a Christ follower? Mark and I have always been hungry for mentors. And then as we're raising our kids in multiple different cultures, we have really had to drill down and go, okay, what's a biblical value, or what does the Bible say versus what's a cultural value? What's culture telling us to do? And just disentangling the two that can sometimes become so interwoven. You don't know, is this culture or is this the Bible? And then coming back to the U.S., and I think specifically for me as a woman, a leader in ministry, raising 4 daughters, serving in the church in different contexts, there's that blaring question of, okay, who are women? What are women? What are women designed for? What is our role in the world? What is our role in the church? And I will say this, because, in the United States, we have more Christians, we have more churches, we have more denominations, and it was a different context than serving in Japan and the Czech Republic. I was surprised and disheartened by what felt like at times a more negative leaning conversation about women in the church, and just navigating that with my daughters and wanting to be able to offer them, a really positive perspective that it's very good to be a woman. It's good to be a girl. And here's how God made us, and celebrate that. So I sat down to write this Bible study from Genesis to Revelation, what the Bible says about being a woman, wanting to offer women and girls a positive vision of being female.
So again, that's Very Good for women, and that's April 2026. And I've got to look at my notes because we were talking about this earlier, and I couldn't get it right. Created on Purpose for students, and that's later this fall, again in 2026. So got time for one more.
Okay.
You say that there is freedom in living God's story. That's an interesting turn of phrase, that you would contextualize freedom within the story construct. So I'm just curious, what do you mean?
Oh, yeah. Well, obviously, this Bible study and a lot of my parenting and women's ministry has been in response to the culture. We're people in a context, and we have to respond to the culture. So we're living in a time and in a place here in the United States where some of our leaders, people in pop culture, people in the judicial system, hesitate to even define what it means to be female. And we say that, gender can be self-made, and we can be anybody we want to be. And, just how we deal with gender right now as a culture is very confusing. And so I wanted to, again, go to the Word of God and use that as our compass, use that as our true north, and be able to explain to women and girls that God's design for women is very good. We see it right there in Genesis. God saw that all he had made, and it was very good. And just respond to culture and say, no, to be made a girl is a beautiful thing. We have a good God, and he designed us beautifully with a good design. Let's walk that out for his glory and the good of others.
Well, I am going to ask one more. So
Okay.
I misled everyone. So you wrote a book that was released in 2022, kind of picking up on that, and the title is Culture Counterfeits, and you refer to the empty promises. And Mark Serra wrote a book years ago, and I cannot remember the name of it, but I remember him talking about the world we live in, and he was trying to unpack this manufactured outrage and rage that we see. And he said, well, in the end, it's because reality and culture can't live up to its promises. And I think that would be a similar ideology that you unpack in Culture Counterfeits. So speaking to group leaders, what counsel would you give these leaders about the relationship between culture and group life? Like, where are those overlap? Because we can't ignore it, but like you said, we have to point to the text, to the true north, and the truth as our guide. And I think it couldn't be more clear today that that's what we need. But I would just be interested in, like, as group leaders and any leaders really, as they navigate some of these tricky circumstances that we have, what counsel do you have for them?
Yes. I think one thing I have seen over the last decade back here in the States is that silence is not helpful. Avoidance is not helpful at all. Because what happens then, I think all humans, but especially women and girls, they're going to go find the answer somewhere. If they're not hearing it in the pulpit, if they're not hearing it in their discipleship group or their Bible study group, a vision of what it means to be female, especially in our time and our place, they will go find the answer from somebody else. And what I want to say to group leaders is we have the best answer. We know the author of life. We know the designer and we understand the design. We have got to be putting that before the people that we minister to. So don't stay quiet. I know that sometimes we stay silent because we're worried, we're cautious, we want to be careful, we want to dance around it, we don't want to offend. And I'm not encouraging that we be offensive. Let's lead with deep, unconditional love and tons of grace, but do share the truth. As Peter says, these are the words of life, Lord. Where else would we go? These are the words of life. So put them before your people.
That's Jen Oshman, everybody. She is the author of Very Good from Lifeway Women, and this fall, Created on Purpose. Jen, thank you so much for being with us today and for sharing your heart. I know you've got a lot going on, and congratulations on being a card-carrying empty nester.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
That's going to wrap it up for this episode of the Group Answers Show. A special thanks goes out to our own Donnie Gordon. Push the applause button. And producers Nikki Ogden and Angie Elkins. Look forward to being with you all again on down the road. Thanks for being with us. This episode of Group Answers Podcast was brought to you by our team, executive producer Angie Elkins, producer Nikki Ogden, edited by Donnie Gordon. All episodes are recorded at my personal studio in Evergreen, Colorado with the help of Riverside FM. Artwork by Lauren Irvin. And I'm your host, Brian Daniel. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on the Group Answers Podcast.